So for today's block, I really like today's video because it's really just one single unit that we're making today. We're making a square and a square, and we're using the flip and stitch method. So the flip and stitch method basically is where you are attaching your smaller squares to your larger squares, and you flip them up so that they become part of the, they frame the main block. You only have to cut two different sizes of blocks. You have main large blocks, which are going to be the internal square pieces. Those are going to be cut at 4.5 inches. And then you have your framing pieces. Your framing pieces are going to be cut at 2.5 inches. So we have one set where we have a dark color. We have 4 squares at a dark color, and then we have 16 framing square pieces to go with that. Then we have a light or white or a background color that is cut at 4.5 inches. We have 4 of these squares, and then we have 8 of one color and 8 of another color. And then for our centerpiece, we have 1 square cut, and we have 4 light colors for it. So let's go ahead and take one square and a square and go through the process of building it. Okay, so I'm going to take my B, and to demonstrate how this is going to go, I'm going to take one of my A dark squares, and then I'm going to take 4, then I'm going to set these aside. So now that we have a starting piece from which to go by, you have your main piece of fabric, all right? And let's set this one off to the side because there is no preparation for that. But we have our 4 small units. Now, a square and a square is going to be done in 2 phases. We're going to first attach 2 of the squares, come back, cut the extra off, and then we're going to do the second stage, which is adding the final 2 squares. So how do we prepare our regular small squares? Even more important, how do we know what size these squares need to be? The calculation for this square and a square method is basically you take your finished size, what your finished size of square will be, right? So in this case, finished size is going to be 4 inches. It's cut at 4.5, the ½ inches to cover the seam allowance. So you take the finished size and you divide it by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. Then you add 1/2 inch to that. So now we have 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches is what your small framing square pieces need to be. So what are the preparation steps for our square and a square? We want to take the edge of our ruler and line it up on our small framing square piece, corner to corner on the diagonal. And we're going to take and draw a line corner to corner on the diagonal. Because this is a good size block and so many people are always looking for ways to work with their scrap, but if you're like me at all, I have a bin full of scrap pieces that were just from cut units. But I saw somebody on a video one day take their flip and stitch method to the next level. On their stitch line, they took another 1/4 inch or ½ inch away, and they drew another line. And then what they did was they stitched on that second drawn line. And when they came back, they cut it down the middle, and they had a free 1.5 inch half square triangle. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and pin this in place. And we're going to repeat this for all 3 of our small squares. So let's go ahead and draw our lines now. So now we have all 4 of our squares prepped up, but we're not going to attach the last 2 on. We're going to go ahead and line up our second piece onto our block. Oops, and I have it wrong. I need to have that line there. Another way to tell whether or not your cutting is really accurate is when you have these 2 pieces overlapping. If you're able to see through that and it looks like a perfect square, you should smile at yourself because that's a good sign that your cutting is accurate. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this to the sewing machine and let's make the first half of our square in a square. Okay, so we have our first phase done for a square in a square. Let's go ahead and give these a quick cut. All right, so yeah, now you just line your 1/4 inch mark and you cut right down the center. Now, before we show the square in a square portion, let's look at the big reveal for our half square triangles. So I'm just going to open that up, give it a light nail press, and there you have a half square triangle that you can use in another project. For a square in a square, you're going to take each one of these and you're going to gently roll it open. I tend to flip these up and have the seams going towards the flip and stitch, but these are light colored. Would you flip these the other way, or would you flip them just like this with light colored fabrics? And I'm just simply doing a quick finger press. You could do a manual press if you've got a tool like this. Another tool you can use if you've got a turnout tool, but you could just take this and use the polished edge of it and do that. Another thing that works, the back side of a spoon. All right, so here's what looks like. Now we're ready to go ahead and do phase 2 of our square in a square. So let's go ahead and make sure we put these on correctly, lining up our edges so that they are nice and flush. And we're going to do the same thing. Now sometimes when I first started doing square in a squares, before I cut them, I would always flip them open to see how nicely aligned they were. If my edges were nice and sharp, then I cut it off. But if I felt that they were wonky, I did a little bit of stitch ripping and retried. So I think this block is a really great exercise in just doing nothing but square in a squares. I hope that I get some good muscle memory out of this. All right, so now we're ready to take this to the sewing machine and finish up our square in a square for this particular unit. Let's go ahead and do the big reveal. All right, so let's go ahead and cut right down the center and get our free half square triangles. Now we're ready to go ahead and roll these open and give them a nice little press. That looks like our square in a square. What some people might do, recommend, when you draw your stitch line, right, especially if you're using the edge of a device, when you draw that stitch line, if you're drawing it right corner, exact corner, to do your stitch line, just scant on the outside since this is going towards the outside of the unit. Or draw your stitch line. If your corner is right here, the tip of your corner is right here, draw your line just on the outside of that corner. What happens is when you go to fold this open, right, and I'm folding it this way, if you notice when you go to fold your fabric open, there is some fabric that gets taken up in that fold. And so that's why a lot of quilters recommend that you draw your stitch line or that you stitch scant on towards the outside of your stitch line. And then that way when you go to fold it back, you're getting all of the proper real estate that you should have. There's still the process of squaring up our square in a square. I don't have a perfect method, but what I'm finding that works for me, I'm going to take the measurement of my unfinished square in a square. What we want to do is we want to make sure that these are center and these are center. So I'm going to take 4.5 inches and I'm going to divide that in half. So that is 2 1/4 inch. Okay, then I'm going to take and find my 2 1/4 inch line. This line here is my 2 1/4, and this line here is my 2 1/4. I want this point and this point to be lined up at 2 1/4. All right, and this point here should fall right in line with this one here, and this point here should fall right in line with this one here. And so 2 1/4 line and 2 1/4 line. So that is nice lined up here. and nicely lined up here. So then I'm going to go ahead and make a cut. Doesn't look like there's anything hanging over. So we have a little bit that we cut off there. Then I'm going to turn it 180 degrees and I'm going to perform the same step. So 2 1/4, 2 1/4. I should also be making sure when I go to make my second cut that my 4 1/2 inch line is also running parallel. And there is very, very little wiggle room to accommodate squaring up square in a square. Sliver dust. And that's as square up as I can get it. So if you have tips or tricks on how you square up your square in a square, go ahead and please put some suggestions in the comments so our viewers can see the different ways to do this. So we have 1 square in a square done for our 8-pointed star all over variation block. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to start working on marking all of my small squares. Okay, so we have all of our blocks marked and we have all of our pieces paired up with the right starting square. So let's go ahead and take these to the sewing machine and start chain stitching and getting our bonus half square triangles and our phase 1 square in a squares done. Let's go ahead and give that a quick cut. So let's go ahead and remove our pins. Cut once, cut twice. All right, I'm not going to worry about opening these up, but I will roll these open because they will need to be opened up so that we can attach the second set. All right, so there is one of our square in a square. Now remember, this one has 2 different colors that go with it. So we will take its partner pair and let's go ahead and attach that. So we want our blue next to our blue and then go ahead and put our red next to our red, making sure that our short line is towards the outside and making sure that our edges line up and they're nice and flush. That's one that's ready. So I'm going to finish doing that with all of these and get them ready for the next phase of our square in a square. So on the 6-inch block, we have all of these points that we want to match up, and that can add quite a bit of bulk into the back. So as you can see on this one here, I did press my seams open in the major joining areas. But when we take a closer look at this, we see that all of our triangles are pressed to the outside of the unit. And so when we go to piece these together here at the point, we have 6 layers of fabric. And one of the other things that helps us with making sure that we've done a good job at matching our points up is nesting our seams. So I'm going to try to use this block as a descriptor. I'm going to take my units that have the white squares instead of the dark squares. I'm going to take those and I'm actually pressing the seams for those units towards the center. So these are the white units, right? And then this is what they look like when we're pressing the seams towards the center. And the dark units, they have their seams going towards the outside. If we alternate, is that going to help match up our points better and help our block lay flatter? So I'm just going to give it a go and see how it comes out. So when we're done, all of our dark units are going to look like this, and our white colored squares or our light colored squares are going to be exact opposite. So let's go ahead and head over to the sewing machine. And again, we're just going to chain piece these all like we did the last time. And once I've done with that, I will meet you back at the table. So see you in a stitch or two. Okay, so we have everything sewed on now. So now we just need to go through the process of cutting everything. So I'm just going to take it 1 square at a time. We have 36 half square triangles at the size of about 1.5. So that's going to make for a fun detailed block in the future. With these, I can just finger press, use my nail. It does a great job. So there's our dark colored blocks. So I'm going to take these to the pressing station. So as you saw, these seams are going inwards. I'm going to take and do the same step with these. All right, so we have them all pressed, opposing directions. Now we're ready to go ahead and finish up the squaring up process. And I'm hoping that the decision to put these towards the inside isn't going to be a blocker. Okay, so I've gone through and squared all of the blocks up. It's time to go ahead and lay out the block so that we can put it all together. So there's our 4 main blocks. And remember, the seams are all pressed towards the outer edges of the blocks. Now we have our block laid out and ready to assemble. Now for this block, we do have a lot of seams to match. And a lot of points that we want to make sure that we keep intact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through like you would put together a normal 9 patch, starting with one side and taking 2 at a time, putting them all right sides together, sewing your 1/4 inch seam allowance, right? Coming back and joining these. But because we have these points that we want to match, we want to figure out how to keep our points and keep them lined up so that they form a nice parallel line. In order to match up the seams, we need some pins, all right? And we want to make sure that these points match up. These are our focus points for right now. And this process is going to be applied when we attach these as well as when we attach the rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this right sides together. So now you can see that this seam here is going towards the outside, but on this block the seam is going towards the inside. And now what I want to do is I'm going to flip this back here. There is a stitch line here and there is a stitch line here. I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to poke it through where those 2 stitch lines meet. Should come out right at the peak of that point. And then I'm going to take and put it in this one right at the same spot. And I'm going to hover and I'm going to put my pin so that it's perpendicular to the 2 fabrics. Now I know with that pin inside, my 2 points are equal. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a second pin, just like that. Now some people may pin on both sides of it. So now the only thing left to do is to make sure that my edges are as parallel and flush as I can together. And I'm going to apply this match up process for each of these 2 blocks. So actually I'm going to go ahead and stick another pin in because I don't like that hump there. I'm just going to go ahead and stick a secondary pin in. It still keeps it in place, and I took out that pin. All right, so now I have a nice flat unit to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and finish matching these up the same way. When we're also sewing our 1/4 inch seam allowance, that same X that we use to stick our pin through and get that good point alignment between the 2 units, we also want to make sure that when we sew our 1/4 inch seam allowance down the edge, we want our stitch line to be just on the outside of that X. That's going to make sure that we haven't chopped off any of our points. So when we go to open it up, we can see that we have both of our points lined up intact. I haven't chopped them off. So I'm going to go ahead and finish, and I will see you back with our rows completed. So there we have all 3 of our rows attached, and our points are nice and intact. Our next step is to go ahead and press the seams in opposing directions so that when we go to put our rows together, that they nest really well, reducing the bulk and helping us to keep all of our very valuable points. All right, so we're going to pin in a few different spots on these blocks. But let me go ahead and get these rows pressed. So the top row and the bottom row seams are going to be pressed towards the outside, and then in the center row the seams will be pressed towards the middle. All right, so we have all of our rows pressed and we've got them lined up. Taking the same concept as we did with just our 2 blocks together, we're going to fold our top row right sides together. First, match my center points together. I'm going to pin from this side because I can see where the 2 stitch lines cross. That puts my pin right there at the very, 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 very tip. And I'm going to match it up to this one. Put that pin in perpendicular. All right, and I'm going to pin it in place, just to lock it in place. Take that pin out. So that's the first point. The second one that I want to make sure that I do is I want to line, so where these 2, on this block, where these 2 units meet up, and on these 2 block, where the seam is, we want to catch that. We want to line it up, make it nice and snug, make sure our seams are matched up so we keep our points nice and sharp. And I'm going to stick a pin in there. And then I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to repeat the same steps. Now I've got 3 basic pins in here. And then the last thing that I want to do is I just want to make sure that these points, that these 2 points for these 2 units are matching up. I'm going to put a pin in to keep it in position. And I'm going to make sure that these 2 points on these 2 facing units, I'm going to make sure that those are also lined up. Doing that 1/4 inch seam allowance and being very careful that my stitch line does not pass that where these 2 stitch lines intersect. So let's go ahead and attach our top and middle row together, and then we'll come back and attach our final row and display this block for the end of our episode. Wow, there are a lot of points in this block. This is our Kansas star, or an 8-pointed star all over. I think that, with all of our diligence and our attention to detail, we have been pretty successful at lining up our points. Now let's look at that 6-inch block that I showed you earlier. And just to highlight, so here we have a Kansas star with a red wreath around it. It's the same exact block, but what it highlights is when you take and change up one color, it changes the whole design. So here we have the red wreath, but then with the blue, your 8-pointed star is just a little bit more integrated into the block as a whole. So you can see it as a star, or you can see it as a crisscross pattern. So there it is, finished with our 6-inch block. And the bonus, we got 36 half-square triangles. I really hope that you enjoyed this journey with me today, putting this block together. And if you have any comments, tips, or tricks, please, please, please go ahead and put them in the comments below so that we can all share in learning and improving our quilting techniques. May all your quilting journeys be joyful, one stitch at a time.